Hello, my name's Rob, and I want to welcome you to today's Road to Easter devotion. Our title for today's story is Weep for Yourselves, which is kind of a weird phrase that Jesus used in a conversation with some woman following him towards the cross. And our reading today comes from Luke, chapter 23, verses 26 to 28. It reads as follows. As the soldiers led him away, they seized Simon from Cyrene, who was on his way in from the country, and they put the cross on him, and they made him carry it behind Jesus. A large number of people followed him, including women who mourned and wailed for him. Jesus turned and said to them, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, weep for yourselves and for your children." You know, Jesus hated hypocrisy. And throughout his ministry, he confronted hypocrites with a level of indignation and anger that we don't really see him directing towards anyone else. The religious leaders, known as the Pharisees, were usually challenged by Jesus, not for their beliefs or their teaching, but for their actions, which were so often inconsistent with the things that they preached to others about. Yet the Easter story reminds us that hypocrisy is a universal human problem. And whilst everybody expects better from religious leaders than the stories that we so often hear of our moral failures and falls, there is some hypocrisy in an angry crowd that criticizes. You see, it's easy to point out how let down you are by the sinful actions of others, particularly religious leaders, whilst expecting others to be much more understanding if you commit the same sins. Perhaps worse than that is when we express great sympathy for a person in difficult circumstances whose predicament was actually caused by our own choices or actions. We so often make choices that have grave consequences for others who we then claim to want to help. You know, the injustices of our societies and the inequalities that we see in the world are things that we mourn, but that doesn't mean that we're willing to make the changes necessary for some of those injustices to be addressed. On the road to the cross, an innocent bystander is forced by the occupying soldiers to carry a heavy cross behind Jesus, who has been whipped and beaten so severely that he could not carry it himself. There's no indication in Luke's account that anybody spoke out about Simon from Cyrene being mistreated in this way. Perhaps they feared the soldiers would turn on them, or perhaps it's because the whole crucifixion had come about at the insistence of the people themselves. They were the ones that formed a crowd which, with a little bit of prompting from the Pharisees, shouted and convinced Pilate to perpetuate a great injustice and crucify this man who had claimed to be the king of the Jews. The Jewish leaders and the Jewish people themselves had rejected Jesus as their king, and even had the audacity to tell Pilate that they had no king but Caesar. What hypocrisy! They had no love for Caesar. They had unsuccessfully rebelled against Roman rule a number of times. So they were just playing politics, trying to paint Pilate as an enemy of Caesar if he didn't give in to their demands. And it worked, because even dictatorial leaders are beholden to enact the will of the people when the crowd is large enough. Otherwise, another revolution could have been on the cards. The people of Jerusalem allied themselves with a foreign king that they hated in order to oppose Jesus. They asked for a radical murderer named Barabbas to be released, so as to ensure that Jesus was not, despite his obvious innocence. They conspired to punish a good man whilst throwing support behind Barabbas and Caesar, men that they believed to be evil. So when a bunch of women started wailing in a very public demonstration of sympathy for Jesus, he was having none of it. Quoting the prophet Hosea, Jesus again warned that judgment was coming upon the people of Jerusalem for their rejection of him as their king. It's possible these women had either been silent in the face of injustice unfolding at Jesus' trial before Pilate, or they could have actually been among those inciting Pilate to give in to the will of the people, perhaps due to their hatred of Roman occupiers, but without regard for the consequences of their actions for Jesus. Perhaps it was only hitting them now. So on that road to Golgotha, where Jesus would be executed as a direct result of either their actions or their apathy, he turned to them and reminded them that God cannot be mocked, and we will all reap what we sow. When we allow injustice or actually further its spread, we set ourselves up to live in a world where anarchy reigns, and everyone has something to fear. When we lament the unfairness of someone else's situation, but do nothing within our power to change it, our words are empty, hypocritical expressions that only serve to prove that we know right from wrong, but choose to allow evil to go unchecked. You know, Jesus went to the cross for our hypocrisy, and he died to pay the price for our actions, as well as our apathy and inaction. Yet, whilst so doing, he called us to live differently. He willingly sacrificed his life for the sake of others and called his disciples to take his example seriously, taking a different path to that of the world, a path that leads to a cross of our own. So let's not be those who only speak with sadness about circumstances that we may actually have the collective power to change. Let's not post on social media about the effects of climate change when we aren't willing to cut down our own carbon footprint. And hey, let's not travel to faraway lands spending money to see poverty up close so that we can post a picture of ourselves there to show off our concern. Let's actually share some of what we have with those in need so that we empower them rather than just feel good about ourselves. Let's not berate whoever's sin is in the spotlight at the moment, as if we had nothing to hide or as if our own behavior doesn't matter as much, because they're celebrities or they're people in positions of influence. You know, everyone has influence, and everyone makes bad choices from time to time. We're all guilty of hypocrisy. And Easter is a time to reflect not just on the fact that Jesus paid the price so that we might be forgiven, but also on how serious we are about responding to his call to take up our cross and to follow him. Inequality demands that we sacrifice to address it. Injustice demands our actions to prevent it. May God's grace lead us all to confession and repentance so that we might become agents of change in our society. Why not take some time today to pray and to ask God to forgive you for your failings and to guide you to follow the path that Jesus walked?